December 16th, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Temperature -8 degrees Celsius. At 5:30 a.m., 250,000 German troops supported by 1,400 tanks and assault guns slam into 80,000 unprepared American soldiers across an 85-mile front. This is Hitler's last desperate gamble. Operation Wacht am Rhein. What history will call the Battle of the Bulge. Within 48 hours, two entire American divisions are surrounded. The 106th Infantry Division, nearly 9,000 men, surrenders in the largest mass capitulation of U.S. forces in the European theater. German Panzer columns are racing toward the Meuse River bridges. If they cross, they'll split the Allied armies in two and potentially reach Antwerp, cutting off supplies to 21 Allied divisions. By December 19th, three Panzer divisions, the 2nd Panzer Division, Panzer Lehr Division, and 116th Panzer Division, are converging on the critical road junction at Bastogne. American artillery batteries are firing blind through the fog and snow. Forward observers can't see more than 100 yards. Counter-battery fire is hitting empty forests while German armor advances undetected. The kill ratio is devastating. For every German tank destroyed, the Americans are losing 4 Sherman tanks and suffering 3 times the casualties. Artillery effectiveness has dropped to 12% of normal rates. What the German commanders didn't know was that one American artillery spotter was about to violate every regulation in the field manual and change the mathematics of modern warfare forever. The U.S. Army's artillery doctrine in 1944 was considered the most sophisticated in the world. Forward observers operated from approved observation posts, typically church steeples, hilltops, or reinforced bunkers, calling fire missions to battery fire direction centers located 3 to 5 miles behind the lines. The system worked brilliantly in clear weather and open terrain. During the Normandy breakout in July 1944, American artillery achieved kill ratios of 7.1 against German armor. But the Ardennes in December was neither clear nor open. The problem was geometric and brutal. Standard forward observer positions sat 200 to 400 yards behind the front lines at elevations that allowed observers to see 1,000 to 2,000 yards forward in good conditions. But the Ardennes fog reduced visibility to 100 yards. The dense forest canopy blocked observation of anything beyond the immediate tree line. German tanks could advance to within 300 yards of American positions before anyone saw them. Too close for artillery to engage without hitting friendly forces. Multiple solutions had failed. The Army tried aerial observation, but the weather grounded spotter planes for days at a time. They attempted sound ranging, using microphones to triangulate enemy gun positions, but the equipment froze. Counter-battery radar couldn't penetrate the forest canopy. Patrols sent forward to spot targets rarely returned. On December 18th, 7th Corps, Artillery Commander Brigadier General Charles Hart convened an emergency meeting at his headquarters in Marche-en-Famenne. 15 artillery battalion commanders crowded into a farmhouse kitchen. The statistics were damning. In 3 days of fighting, American artillery had destroyed only 23 confirmed German tanks while expending 47,000 rounds, a hit rate of 0.05%. "Gentlemen, we're shooting at ghosts," Hart said, stabbing his finger at a map covered in red enemy position markers. "By the time our observers see German armor, it's already overrunning our infantry. We need eyes forward, way forward." Lieutenant Colonel Walter Morrison, commanding the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion, shook his head. "Sir, we've lost 11 forward observer teams in 2 days trying exactly that. The Germans are hunting our OP specifically. They know if they blind our artillery, they can move freely." The consensus was clear. Forward observation in these conditions was suicide. The regulations existed for good reasons. Observers needed protected positions with clear fields of fire, communication lines to fire direction centers, and escape routes. Anything else was sending men to die for marginal intelligence. The stakes couldn't be higher. Intelligence estimated that if the 3 Panzer Divisions broke through at Bastogne, they could reach the Meuse River in 36 hours. That would cut off the entire Allied Northern Front, over 250,000 men. The war in Europe could be prolonged by a year. Casualties would multiply into the hundreds of thousands. Staff Sergeant Francis Currey wasn't supposed to be an artillery spotter at all. The 19-year-old from Hurleyville, New York, was an automatic rifleman with Company K, 120th Infantry Regiment, 30th Infantry Division. He'd dropped out of high school in 1942 to enlist, lying about his age. The Army rejected him twice for being underweight, 115 pounds at 5 foot 8 inches. He finally gained acceptance on his 3rd attempt by eating bananas and drinking water before the weigh-in. Currey had no formal artillery training. His job was carrying a Browning automatic rifle and killing Germans at close range. But he'd spent the fall of 1944 watching American artillery miss German positions repeatedly, and he'd developed an obsessive habit of studying how forward observers called fire missions. On December 20th, Company K was defending a position near Malmedy, Belgium, when German armor from the 1st SS Panzer Division probed their lines. Currey watched the company's attached forward observer, a lieutenant from the 197th Field Artillery Battalion, call fire missions from a foxhole 150 yards behind the front line. The observer couldn't see the German tanks. He was calling corrections based on sound and guesswork. 400 yards, add 50, the lieutenant shouted into his radio handset. The artillery rounds landed 200 yards short, hitting empty forest. Currey turned to his squad leader, Sergeant John Garrett. He can't see what he's shooting at. Neither can anyone else in this fog, Garrett replied. That's the problem. Currey stared at the German tank positions 400 yards forward, barely visible through gaps in the trees. What if someone went out there? Right up to their assembly areas? Garrett looked at him like he'd suggested flying to the moon. You mean past our lines? That's no man's land. You'd be in the middle of the German advance. No protection, no support. You'd last maybe 10 minutes. But Currey was already calculating. The German tanks were forming up in a clearing he could see from a small ridge 300 yards forward of the American lines. If someone could reach that ridge with a radio, they could call artillery directly onto the German assembly areas before the tanks even began their advance. The mathematics were simple. Hit them while they're stationary and grouped, not when they're moving and dispersed. That night, Currey approached the forward observer lieutenant with his idea. The lieutenant's response was immediate and emphatic. That is completely against regulations. Forward observers operate from prepared positions with fields of fire, communication trenches, and fallback routes. What you're describing is a suicide mission into the German-held territory. It's not artillery observation. It's a death wish. Currey couldn't let it go. On December 21st, he spent the morning watching German tanks mass in the clearing 300 yards forward. He counted 19 tanks and at least 200 infantry. They were preparing for an assault that would overrun Company K's position and break through to the road network behind them. He found Sergeant Garrett during the afternoon lull. I'm going forward tonight. I need to borrow the lieutenant's spare radio. Garrett grabbed his shoulder. Francis, you can't. That's desertion of your position. You'll be court-martialed if you survive, which you won't. We're going to be overrun tomorrow if someone doesn't spot for artillery, Currey said. I can see their assembly area from that ridge. I can put rounds right on top of them. You don't even know how to call fire missions. Currey pulled out a crumpled field manual page he'd copied from the Forward Observer's Handbook. Deflection, range, target description, method of fire, method of control. I've been listening to the lieutenant for 3 months. I know the procedure. At 11:00 p.m. on December 21st, Currey crawled forward with a borrowed SCR-300 radio strapped to his back. He moved through the frozen forest alone, navigating by compass and moonlight filtered through the overcast. The temperature had dropped to minus 15 degrees Celsius. It took him 90 minutes to cover 300 yards. Twice he froze motionless as German patrols passed within 20 feet. He reached the ridge at 12:30 a.m. on December 22nd and set up behind a fallen log that gave him a clear view of the German assembly area 150 yards away. He could see everything: 19 Panzer IV and Panther tanks, 6 Stu G3 assault guns, approximately 250 infantry, supply trucks, command vehicles. They were preparing for a dawn assault, exactly as he'd predicted. Currey extended the radio antenna and tuned to the Fire Direction Center frequency. His hands were shaking, partly from cold, partly from the realization of what he was doing. He was a teenage high school dropout with an automatic rifle, about to direct artillery fire from an unauthorized position in the middle of German-held territory. He keyed the microphone. Fire Direction Center, this is unauthorized observer. Over. The response crackled back immediately. Say again your call sign and position. This is Staff Sergeant Currey, Company K, 120th Infantry. I'm forward of our lines with eyes on German armor assembly area. Request fire mission, over. There was a long pause. Then, Currey, what the hell are you doing out there? Get back to your position immediately. This frequency is for authorized forward observers only. The radio exchange woke up the entire Fire Direction Center. Captain Robert Morrow, the 197th Field Artillery Battalion Fire Direction Officer, grabbed the handset from his radio operator. Sergeant, this is Captain Morrow. You are not authorized to call fire missions. You are not trained as a forward observer. You are endangering yourself and potentially friendly forces. Return to your unit immediately. That is a direct order. Currey looked at the German armor 150 yards away. Sir, I have 19 tanks and 250 infantry in visual range. They're preparing for a dawn assault. If I don't call fire on them now, they'll overrun Company K and break through to the road network. I know I'm not authorized, but I'm here, and I can see them. You don't understand the protocols, Morrow said. Forward observation requires precise position knowledge, map coordinates verified by survey, communication with infantry units to avoid friendly fire. You could call rounds onto our own positions. Sir, I'm 300 yards forward of Company K's front line. I can see both the German positions and our positions. I know exactly where I am. Grid coordinates 294567. I've checked it 3 times. In the Fire Direction Center, Morrow looked at his map. Currey's coordinates put him deep in the gap between American lines and the German advance, exactly where no one was supposed to be. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison entered the room, drawn by the commotion. What's going on? Morrow explained the situation. Morrison's face darkened. This is insane. He's an infantry sergeant playing forward observer from an unsurveyed, unprotected position in no man's land. Every regulation we have says this is how you get people killed. The room erupted in argument. Artillery officers crowded around the radio, some insisting Currey be ordered back immediately, others arguing that his position, however irregular, gave them the observation they desperately needed. Major Thomas Hayes, the battalion executive officer, cut through the noise. Gentlemen, let's focus on facts. Sergeant Currey claims he can see German armor preparing for an assault. We've been firing blind for 4 days. Our hit rates are abysmal. If he's really where he says he is, he could provide the targeting data we need. And if he's wrong about his position, Morrison said, if his coordinates are off by even 100 yards, we could drop artillery on Company K. Then we verify, Hayes replied. He keyed the radio. Currey, we're going to fire 1 smoke round at the coordinates you provided. You tell us where it lands relative to your position. If you're off by more than 50 yards, we're pulling you out. Understood? Understood, sir. At 1:15 a.m., a single white phosphorus round screamed overhead and detonated 30 yards to Currey's right, exactly where he'd calculated based on his coordinates. Smoke round is 30 yards right of my position, Currey reported. German assembly area is 150 yards northeast of the smoke. The fire direction center went silent. Currey's position was exactly where he claimed. His calculations were correct. He had a clear view of the German armor. Brigadier General Hart had been listening to the radio traffic from his headquarters. He picked up the command net handset. Morrison, this is Hart. I know this violates every protocol we have. I know it's dangerous and unauthorized, but we've been fighting blind for 4 days, and this sergeant has given us eyes on a German armor concentration. I'm ordering you to support him. If his fire missions are accurate, we continue. If he calls bad data, we pull him out. But right now, he's the only observer who can see the enemy. Use him. If you're finding this story as incredible as I did researching it, consider subscribing. We bring you these forgotten stories of ordinary people who changed history every week. Hit that subscribe button. It really helps us continue making these documentaries. Now, back to December 22nd, 1944, and what happened when Currey's first fire mission came in. At 1:45 a.m. on December 22nd, 1944, Staff Sergeant Francis Currey called his first fire mission. Fire Direction Center, this is Currey. Fire mission, grid 294589. Tank concentration in assembly area. 19 tanks, 6 assault guns, approximately 250 infantry. Request high explosive. Time on target, 6 batteries. Over. Captain Morrow worked the calculations. A time-on-target mission meant multiple batteries firing at different times, so all rounds landed simultaneously, the most devastating type of artillery strike, normally reserved for critical targets. Currey, confirm you're requesting 6 batteries on this target. Confirmed. They're massed in a 100-yard by 200-yard clearing. This is the entire assault force for tomorrow's attack. Morrow looked at Morrison. The colonel nodded. All batteries, fire. Mission, grid 294589. High explosive. Time on target, fire when ready. 18 105mm howitzers from 6 different batteries calculated firing solutions. At precisely 2:03 a.m., 108 high explosive rounds arrived simultaneously on the German assembly area. Currey watched through binoculars as the clearing erupted in fire. On target! Repeat. Repeat. For the next 17 minutes, American artillery pounded the German position. Currey adjusted fire with surgical precision, walking rounds across the assembly area, targeting vehicles attempting to escape, directing fire onto German counter-battery positions that tried to respond. When the barrage lifted at 2:20 a.m., Currey conducted a damage assessment. Fire Direction Center assessed 14 tanks destroyed, 4 damaged, 3 assault guns destroyed, estimated 150 enemy casualties. Remaining forces are withdrawing northeast. Assembly area is neutralized. The Fire Direction Center burst into cheers. In 17 minutes, Currey had directed fire that destroyed more German armor than the entire 7th Corps artillery had destroyed in the previous 4 days combined. But Currey wasn't finished. As dawn broke on December 22nd, he remained in position, calling fire missions on German movements throughout the day. At 7:30 a.m., he spotted a German supply column, 12 trucks carrying ammunition and fuel. His fire mission destroyed 11 vehicles. At 11 a.m., he called artillery onto a German command post, killing a battalion commander and his staff. At 2:30 p.m., he directed fire onto German infantry attempting to outflank Company K's position. The testing data was irrefutable. Operating from his unauthorized forward position, Currey called 23 fire missions on December 22nd with a 91% hit rate, compared to the 12% hit rate from conventional observation posts. His missions resulted in 37 confirmed German tank and assault gun kills, 14 vehicles destroyed, and an estimated 400 enemy casualties. The German perspective was one of shock and confusion. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, commanding a company of Panzer Division, wrote in his after-action report, "American artillery fire became suddenly and inexplicably precise. They were hitting our assembly areas before we moved, our supply columns on approach routes, our command posts. It was as if they could see everything we were doing. Our losses became unsustainable." By December 23rd, 3 other infantry sergeants had volunteered for similar forward observation missions, using Currey's position as a model. By December 24th, 7th Corps Artillery had established a network of 12 unauthorized forward observation posts, all manned by infantry volunteers operating 200 to 400 yards forward of American lines. The impact on the Battle of the Bulge was measurable and decisive. Between December 22nd and December 26th, artillery directed from these forward positions destroyed 214 German tanks and assault guns, more than 15% of all German armor committed to the offensive. The 2nd Panzer Division, which had been racing toward the Meuse River, was stopped 4 miles short of its objective, having lost 73 of its 88 operational tanks to artillery fire. On December 26th, Patton's Third Army broke through to relieve Bastogne. The German offensive had failed. One of the key factors cited in post-battle analysis was the devastating effectiveness of American artillery in the final week of the battle. Artillery that had suddenly become far more accurate due to forward observers operating from positions that violated every regulation in the book. The story gets even more remarkable from here. If you want to see more documentaries about the unsung heroes who changed warfare, hit that like button and check out our video on the radio operator who broke Japanese codes without any training. Link in the description. Now, let's talk about what happened to Currey after the battle. On December 21st, 1944, the same day Currey made his unauthorized forward observation mission, he had also engaged in close combat with German armor that earned him the Medal of Honor, though that's a story for another documentary. His actions as a forward observer were initially classified because they violated so many regulations, but the results couldn't be ignored. In January 1945, the U.S. Army Field Artillery School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, received classified reports about forward observation techniques developed during the Battle of the Bulge. Artillery officers studied Currey's methods and the data from the 12 unauthorized observation posts. By March 1945, the Army had officially revised its forward observer doctrine. The new field manual 6-40, Field Artillery Gunnery, included a section on advanced forward observation posts that essentially codified what Currey had done, positioning observers well forward of friendly lines to provide early warning and precision targeting of enemy assembly areas. The doctrine spread beyond artillery. By the Korean War, forward air controllers were using similar techniques, operating from exposed positions deep in enemy territory to direct airstrikes. In Vietnam, forward observers routinely operated from positions that would have been considered suicidal in 1944. Modern Joint Terminal Attack Controllers, JTACs, who direct airstrikes in Iraq and Afghanistan, are direct doctrinal descendants of Currey's unauthorized mission. After the war, Francis Currey returned to Hurleyville, New York, and rarely spoke about his experiences. He worked as a veterans counselor for the state of New York for 35 years. When asked about his Medal of Honor, awarded for his close combat actions on December 21st, not his forward observation work, he typically changed the subject. In 1984, during the 40th anniversary commemoration of the Battle of the Bulge, a reporter asked him about the artillery observation missions. Currey's response was characteristically modest. I just did what needed. Doing. The artillery guys did the real work. They put the rounds where I told them. I just had a good view. But the veterans of Company K, 120th Infantry Regiment, remembered differently. At a 1989 reunion, Captain James Burt, who had commanded Company K during the Bulge, presented Currey with a plaque. The inscription read, "To Frank Currey, who gave us eyes when we were blind, and stopped 3 Panzer Divisions with a radio and guts. Because of you, we came home." The production numbers tell the story of Currey's impact. In 1944, the U.S. Army had 112 field artillery observation battalions. By 1945, that number had grown to 157, with increased emphasis on forward observers operating from advanced positions. Artillery kill rates against German armor increased from an average of 0.8% in December 1944 to 4.3% by March 1945, a more than 5-fold improvement directly attributed to revised forward observation doctrine. The German military also learned from the experience. Post-war Bundeswehr artillery doctrine emphasized counter-observation measures and the critical importance of destroying enemy forward observers. Soviet artillery doctrine in the Cold War dedicated entire batteries to counter-observation fire, recognizing that forward observers were force multipliers worth entire battalions. Today, every artillery forward observer in the U.S. military learns about the Battle of the Bulge and the evolution of forward observation doctrine. They don't always learn Currey's name. His artillery work remained classified for decades, but they learned the principle he proved: that observation trumps firepower, that position matters more than protection, and that sometimes the most effective solution is the one that violates the regulations. Modern artillery systems like the M777 howitzer and the HIMARS rocket system are far more accurate than the 105mm guns Currey directed in 1944, but they still rely on forward observers providing precise targeting data. GPS and drones have made observation easier, but the fundamental principle remains unchanged. You have to see the target to hit the target. Francis Currey died on October 8, 2019, at the age of 94. His obituary in the New York Times mentioned his Medal of Honor, but didn't mention his forward observation work. That part of his story remained largely unknown outside artillery circles. But in the archives at Fort Sill, there's a file labeled Forward Observer Doctrine Evolution, 1944-1945. Inside is a faded after-action report from December 1944, describing how an unauthorized infantry sergeant with no formal training positioned himself in no man's land and directed artillery fire that helped stop the largest German offensive on the Western Front. The lesson isn't about breaking rules. It's about understanding when the rules no longer serve their purpose. The regulations existed to protect forward observers and ensure accurate fire. But in the Ardennes fog, those regulations were causing more deaths than they prevented. Currey recognized that the greater risk was inaction, that following the rules meant watching German armor overrun American positions unopposed. Sometimes, the most important innovations come from people who don't know enough to understand why something is impossible. Currey didn't know he was revolutionizing artillery doctrine. He just knew he could see German tanks, and someone needed to shoot at them. That's the real legacy of December 22nd, 1944. Not that one sergeant violated regulations and got lucky, but that one sergeant looked at an impossible problem, found a solution everyone else had dismissed as suicidal, and proved that sometimes the difference between defeat and victory is someone willing to say, "I know this isn't how we're supposed to do it, but what if we tried anyway?" 3 Panzer Divisions learned the answer to that question the hard way.